This is Duke University.
This section of Asia is one spur of a larger network that we call, or have since the 19th century, because it was coined in the colonial era as the Silk Road, Seidenstrasse, the overland connections between Central Asian societies and the westernmost China, which begins in the 2nd century BCE. We have the spur that I'm looking at in this lecture is the section that will go down from Sichuan through the mountainous areas, including parts of Guizhou and Yunnan province, into Southeast Asia, including Myanmar, and Vietnam is my particular interest. This all connects in, I just have to make a plug for the modern day, because Yidai Yilu, the One Belt, One Road infrastructure project that has just recently, as in a couple of weeks ago, been touted in the news and reminding the world that now there is a modern Silk Road initiative underway, or it has been for some time. In that larger project of various new forms of communication, of cooperation, and I would also say potential for conflict across Eurasia, we have the section of this network that runs down from that same section I'm talking about into the Indian Ocean. So once again, the Southwest Silk Road is now of strategic importance to Beijing and will become of importance to China's neighboring states as we're reconnecting some of those older paths. The section that I'm looking at here is known as the Southwest Silk Road. And the specific, the point that I start with in this talk, the Stone Gate, Shimen, was at one point a gateway into a frontier. And I think that's the essence of this talk, is that a vanished frontier, a gateway that once marked the end of the state or end of the kind of imperial reach and the opening into a new area of Asia, of different peoples, of different polities. In the course of this talk, will vanish as a frontier, but then reemerges later as a center of trade and now a center of tourism. There's also the connection into the Swan, talking about the Swan, historically speaking, the Swan as a surname to be an ethnonym to becoming a place name, a place, a region. Another aspect of the nature of this region is that it was not under strong external state control until we get beyond the point when the Mongols have swept through in the 13th century and reorganized the landscape. Why this is important to the Southwest Silk Road is that the region was so fractured, the landscape was so mountainous and terrain so rough that you could not conduct trade or communication without direct negotiation with these dong, with those who were the leaders, who were the significant figures in power in these local areas. So the reference to the dong led us to talking about the Dong world. This section here of the talk refers to a single patriarch who's seeking to find his space on the southwestern frontier, and ends with a depiction of the non-Han world. I guess I'm using that loosely because there is no Han ethnicity, but the state, the separate peoples, imperial order that the Swan would eventually come into contact with, confront, and then be changed by. The family history of the frontier people, such as Swan, was not preserved for the most part by members of the clan itself, but with the responsibility of Chinese court chroniclers who collected ethnographic detail from both hearsay and from personal observation before compiling accounts for court use. And so therefore, as Brian Harley has written, that this region, the description of this region is really expressed in a language of power, not of protest, not of the local people, but of those from outside trying to impose some sort of order on the inside. The distant court in central China aimed to name the local peoples and to kind of single out local elite. And that's what happened in the case of the Swan for this region. Swan becomes a surname, becomes a name for describing the peoples of a particular area. Then Suandi becomes the name of the territory in which those people are, and it becomes a political administrative region. The prevailing narrative from the historical record about the Swan was that their ascent began with Xuanxi, who left Chengdu in Sichuan, a major city of Sichuan, for Yunnan, with a military command to assist the Shuhan emperor. So this is in the Three Dynasties period. Liu Bei was going to take control of this region, and he sends Xuanxi as one of the main military commanders to be involved with this. So the rise of the Swan in this case coincides with a very significant change in the transformation of local authority along the Southwestern Silk Road, as I said, following the tumultuous end of the Han Dynasty, which ends in 220. We have descriptions of family arriving from crumbling parts of the Han Empire, coming to the area, settling down, taking up local roles of importance as their elite status is reestablished in a new location along the Southwest Silk Road region. The reverse was more likely than what I've just described. That local families seeing an opportunity, outsiders coming in, established in later generations their genealogies connected themselves to these distant northern families, but they already had established themselves as powerful agents along what was an important trade network in the Southwest Silk Road. So as these armies come, as outsiders come into the region, they take on leadership roles, and then in the Chinese sources, their connections to the Central Plain area, the Zhongyuan region, is noted, but then they're considered to be Yi Shuai, the kind of native rulers, native leaders of the area. That this trade network is what enhances the power of these local people, and the Swan were part of that group. The Swan had beneath them a large, and it's Stephen Harold mentioned that the Swan were a slave-owning society, slave-holding society, and so that in that light you see other peoples under the control of the Swan. Pu'er begins to, tea in general is cultivated. This may be early. They say that pu'er trade could have started as early as the Tang Dynasty, but really it's during the Ming where the actual caravan trade that involved pu'er becomes much more prominent. But the tea trade is going to affect both Southeast Asia and eventually the tea trade from Yunnan into the Himalayan plateau, when you have the connection between Tibet and China through the tea trade. What happens is that another state, an emergence of a more centralized political body, fills that space that we call the Dong world, the Nanzhao kingdom. And when the Nanzhao was formed, it changes the relationship of the Shimen gate. The stone gate is no longer on a frontier, but now it's become an interior. It's a frontier between the Tang and the Nanzhao. And then eventually it's subsumed into part of the Nanzhao itself. At that time, but the Ming is when you have the caravan and you have the Chamagudal developing out of the south, going up that northwest corridor into the Tibetan Plateau region. So there's trade and engagement in trade in this area that the Swan were dominant, but it's harder to make that. Well, taking the state out of the picture, when these are statelets, these are polities, these are political bodies that are organizing themselves, and they engage and energize themselves through the trade, through the exchange of these things that distant markets and distant political centers want.